Newspaper review time. Sally and I are going to look at stories making headlines. Now, let's start with the business section of The Independent, which is leading on something we've spoken about before and we're going to carry on talking about, the Greek bailout talks. The debt-laden nation needs to pay back $330 million in loans on Friday. According to this report, though, the talks with the creditors are going nowhere.
British Prime Minister David Cameron, in the meantime, is rallying support from European leaders to give Britain exemption from the European Union. So far, two senior politicians have sketched deals and are urging others to follow suit.
The Financial Times reports that 6 of Europe's biggest oil and gas companies, including Shell and BP, have asked the United Nations to help them devise a plan to reduce their carbon emissions.
Top story on China Daily is about Beijing's new smoking ban. The Chinese capital is budding out smoking in all indoor public places.
In the FT Companies and Markets section, reports that General Motors is trying to avoid a future backlash over vehicle defects by detecting problems early. Now, they've hired 1,000 people to scour social media to pick up potential issues before even 10 people are affected.
If you're travelling this season, North Korea has recently lifted its 6-month ban over fears of the spread of Ebola. The Japan Times reports the North hopes tourism will increase tenfold in the next 2 years.
And also trending on Twitter at the moment, the hashtag #LoveLocks. Now, The Independent has tweeted, "Is this the end of romance?" So this is all about the Paris love locks, which are being removed from the iconic Pont des Arts bridge.
Well, we are joined by David Carter, who is the CEO, well, a CEO mentor, should I say.
So you mentor chief executives?
Yes, I do.
Absolutely. And only those.
Only those. OK. Well, actually, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on how Greece is panning out. I've said we've spoken about it before, we'll speak about it again. But there's still deadlock with the international creditors. This is what The Independent has picked up on its business pages. How do you think that they're dealing with this issue now as we go forwards?
The Greek government? Well, I think that this is a classic sort of who's going to blink first, where the European funders of Greece know that the numbers don't stack up the way the Greek government are telling its population the way they want to run the economy. And so we've got situations where, you know, the retirement age in Greece is 50. And so the pension costs for the country are just not sustainable compared to the rest of Europe. And the rest of Europe, who's lending the money to Greece, is saying this isn't realistic or sustainable.
But when you look at the new leadership, Alexis Tsipras, the Prime Minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, the Finance Minister of Greece, how do you feel they are handling the negotiations, which they knew from the outset would be very tough, given the rhetoric coming from Wolfgang Schäuble, the Finance Minister of Germany?
Just because they won the election in Greece promising to end austerity doesn't mean that they'll be able to do so, because their ability to do so is a function of their ability to persuade a lot of other people around the world to lend them a lot of money. And without making those reforms, the rest of the world will see that they're just pouring good money after bad, and that the situation is not sustainable or realistic. So the tension, you know, if he's promised his electorate the world but he can't deliver it, then perhaps he won't be the leader for very long.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about how they've approached this. Jose Manuel Barroso, he obviously held the presidency of the European Commission for a while. He says, sometimes I get the impression that people are waiting for an accident so that they can really focus on avoiding a bigger disaster. It's too long this time that has been taken to find a solution. It's important now to find one.
It's funny that US Treasury Secretary last week, Jack Lew, was talking about a catastrophic accident. Yeah. That could have big implications. So we'll move on.
Then finally they could perhaps react.
We'll talk about this all week.
Indeed. The Independent, again, we'll go to the front page now. Of course, in the UK, there is a lot of debate, and this was a key election point for the Conservatives ahead of the general election, that Britain would take a look at its relationship with the EU and whether or not we should have the same ties that the rest of Europe has. And now it appears that there are deals being done in the background. Tell us what the Independent's saying.
I think that the election promise, you know, for Mr. Cameron to renegotiate Britain's role in Europe was very clear. But I think that actually the treaty that was set down over 20 years ago now, a lot of people around Europe are saying, well, perhaps this doesn't work and this doesn't work. And I think that He is now got the support of Emmanuel Macron, the French economy minister, and the president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, who said that perhaps these ideas that Britain's putting forward aren't unrealistic, and perhaps there are other countries in the European Union who would welcome a discussion about these things. So I don't think that actually it's that unreasonable to say after 20 years, well, let's sit down and have a talk about how the rules work for everybody, because some of them are great and some of them aren't working. So I'm very confident that actually Mr. Cameron will be able to renegotiate some changes in the way the European Union and Britain interact, which I think will be very positive for the whole of Europe, not just for Britain.
Moving on to energy, and this is the Financial Times front page. European energy groups seek UN backing for carbon pricing system. This is in the run-up to a meeting in Paris, a UN meeting in Paris that looks to seal an international climate deal. So what are these European companies doing in the run-up to that to get their ducks in a row?
Again, it's very interesting. The Europeans seem to have got their act together as a group, but the two major US oil companies said, no, we don't want to be involved in this. But I think at the end of the day, this is long-term planning, and the oil companies in Europe are saying, we know at some point in the next 100 years the oil and gas is going to run out. We need to start thinking about how to replace that fuel with alternative sources, and perhaps the revenue that we're paying in tax, or the cash that we're paying in tax at the moment, could be used to fund research and development. So let's have a long-term solution to this problem, which we start funding now through perhaps...
But you need the Americans on board as well, ultimately, don't you?
Eventually, of course, yes.
China Daily, got tough news, no smoking rules. Now, it's all very well saying they're tough, this is in Beijing, but actually they've tried this before and failed. So what makes this time any different, David?
I don't know if it will be any different, but I think the interesting thing is often, you know, we look at something like this in terms of China being socially concerned about the health of its population. But actually what they've figured out is that the cost of dealing with the healthcare issues in China of smoking is now significantly greater than the tax that they receive. So whereas for the last...
So you're saying it's just about money, it's not about public health.
It's not about...
You're so cynical, David.
Well, yeah, cynical, but perhaps realistic as well. But pressure from authorities, and if you look at the rest of the world, public...
Well, 300 million people in China smoke out of a population of 50% of all men in China smoke. The tax revenues that they've had for the last 20 years have been significant. But now they've woken up to the fact that the cost of dealing with that is more than the tax revenues. There's a financial decision.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? All right, let's move on to
Fancy
North
a holiday?
Korea. Yeah. So what do you think, David? Are you keen to travel around North Korea? Check it out?
Well, it's not on my bucket list, I have to say, but amazing, interesting idea, isn't it, to go to North Korea on holiday? And I think they have about 100,000 people a year visit the country, 90% of whom come from China.
Which is surprising to hear, isn't it, in itself? You wouldn't expect that, necessarily.
I wonder if they're really tourists, though, or actually people from China going to find out what's going on in North Korea. I wonder if it's actually some kind of covert spying operation. But the idea
All these conspiracy theories are coming out.
The thing is, they have opened. There's a luxury ski resort that's been opened. New restaurants along the beachfront area.
Yes, the biggest attraction they're talking about is a shooting range, though, whether you shoot holograms.
Well, I don't know. It's not necessarily my first choice of holiday, but I certainly wouldn't knock it off the list. Be interesting, wouldn't it? David, thank you so much for joining us. David Carter, their CEO mentor. Sally and I will see you very soon. Do have a lovely day.
Bye-bye.